Hello everyone, my name is Anna and I welcome you all back to another English video for the continuation of our series called Studies of the Brit Hadasha. In today's video, we will be analyzing the Good News or the Gospel of Mark, and we're going to be focusing in chapter 6. The title for today's study is The Unbeliever Rejects Life and the Believer Receives Spiritual Food. In today's chapter, we're going to be seeing and we're going to be understanding that the main point or the main teaching of this chapter is about the two types of people that exist within this world. On one hand, we have the unbeliever who, just as I mentioned in the title, is the one who rejects the life. And on the other hand, we have the believer who receives that spiritual food, which that spiritual food, it is brought by Yeshua. And in this chapter, we're going to be seeing that only one of these two people, which is the true believer, is the one who receives that spiritual food that lasts forever. And this is something that we're going to be seeing, that the spiritual food is only given to those who walk and who live in that true faith. And this is something that we are also going to be seeing within these verses that the Messiah himself, he would do. Why? Because we can take the Messiah's testimony and we can see how Yeshua was living in that true faith. And also this is something that we can see within other biblical characters who lived in the true faith and therefore they received that spiritual food. And basically this is something this is the main point that we're going to be seeing within this chapter 6. Starting off with verses 1 through 6, it says, Yeshua left there and went to his hometown, accompanied by his disciples. When the Shabbat came, he began to teach in the synagogue, and many who heard him were amazed. Where did this man get these things from? They asked. What's this wisdom that has been given to him? What are these remarkable miracles he is performing? Verse 3. Isn't this the carpenter? Isn't this Mary's son and the brother of James, Joseph, and Judas, and Simon? Aren't his sisters here with us? And they took offense at him. Verse 4. Yeshua said to them, A prophet is not without honor except in his own town, among his relatives, and in his own house. Verse 5. He could not do any miracles there except lay his hands on a few people who were ill and healed them. The first thing that we can see within verse 1 is that it starts to narrate how Yeshua went to his hometown, which was Nazareth, along with his disciples. And we can read within these verses, or specifically starting from verse 2, that it begins to tell us that Yeshua being in Nazareth, once Shabbat starts or once Shabbat arrives, he began to teach inside the synagogue. And the people who were in this place and who were hearing him were amazed at everything that Yeshua was saying. But also they were amazed of what had been told of what Yeshua had been doing in other places, such as the miracles, the healings, the liberation of demons, and any other miracles or any other extraordinary things that Yeshua would do. And something that we studied in the previous gospel, which was the Gospel of Matthew, is that Yeshua taught several times on the day of Shabbat, as well as in the synagogues. And with this, what I'm trying to say is that what we can read within these verses that Yeshua taught on the day of Shabbat in a synagogue, it was not something out of the ordinary, or it was not something rare that Yeshua did. Why? Because just as I said, it was something that Yeshua would do. And Yeshua did it to announce the message of redemption to the house of Israel. Whereas he did all this in a way that could be common but also appropriate for this day, which was the day of Shabbat, which something that we have already studied within the Torah, that the day of Shabbat is a consecrated day, is a day of rest. So with all of this, we can see that Yeshua, although he did teach on the day of Shabbat, he did not do it so that he can make his own group or his own followers or his own religion, etc. He did it with the purpose of announcing the message of redemption to the house of Israel. Because let's remember that Yeshua was the prophet that had been promised to the descendants of Abraham. And this is something that we can see within these verses. As well, something that in the Gospel of Matthew that we have already studied is that, or regarding to what Yeshua did within these verses, was that in the Gospel of Matthew, we read that when Yeshua would teach in the day of Shabbat, it would cause a displeasure to the people or to the religious people. Why? Because they saw it as a wrong thing to do for Yeshua to teach on the day of Shabbat. But as I had already said previously, Yeshua did this to fulfill the will of the Eternal. He did not do it, or he was not saying all of these teachings with the purpose of making his own group, making his own religion, his own followers, etc. He was doing it because, just as Yeshua many times within these gospel, he clarifies that everything that he would do was because the Eternal had ordered him. He was only fulfilling with the orders of the Eternal. And this is something that we must always keep in mind and that we should understand, because this was something that the religious people did not want it to see. They did not want it to accept. They did not want to accept the fact that Yeshua was fulfilling with what the Eternal had ordered him, because they thought that Yeshua was trying to do something else. He was trying to probably create his own group, to take away the followers of the religious people, etc. But within these verses, and specifically within the Gospels, we can read that that was not what Yeshua was intending to do. And in verse 3 of this chapter, we can see that the people, when they were seeing who Yeshua was and what Yeshua was doing, the miracles, the teachings, they got to a point where they started asking questions about who Yeshua was. And the first question that we can read in verse 3 is that they ask, is not this the carpenter? And within this verse 3, specifically within this question, we can read that it is mentioned the word carpenter. And in the Spanish translations, they have given this word referring to Yeshua, that Yeshua was a carpenter, which shows, or it refers to, a person who works with the wood. However, this translation is wrong, because the original, or the correct translation, would be potter. Why? Because it contains a meaning and message which applies to Yeshua. And this is according to the prophecy found in Jeremiah 18 verses 14 to 10, where it narrates, or where it prophesies that Israel is compared to a poorly made vessel, which is made again, or it's made once again, but this time it is made through Yeshua with his words. In other words, it is referring that Yeshua is that potter that redoes, or that remakes, this vessel which represents the people of Israel. But he does it with the words that Yeshua was bringing, which was that spiritual food that Yeshua was bringing to the people of Israel. The second question that we can read within verse 3 is that the people say, the son of Miriam, and the brother of James and Joseph, and of Judas and Simon. And this is all true, what they were saying, because Miriam was Yeshua's mother, and Yeshua also had brothers who we can read that some of his brothers were his disciples. But on the other hand, we can notice within this question, and something that some commenters have said about this regarding to this question that is written within this verse 3, is that it is noticeable that Joseph, Miriam's husband, is not mentioned within this verse, or within this verse. And this gives rise to the speculation by some commenters who say that Joseph had already passed away, and therefore Miriam was a widowed woman, and for that reason it is why Joseph is not, or he is not mentioned within these verses. Whatever the case is, we can read within this question that the people asked themselves if Yeshua was the son of Miriam and the brother of James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon, which all of this is true. The third question that we can read in verse 3 is that they ask, "Are not his sisters here before us as well?" And in different versions or in different translations, such as the Royal Code, allude to the fact that his blood or his family were members of the synagogue, and therefore they belonged to that community that was in Nazareth, which is why they were astonished, or the people were astonished, that Yeshua was the brother of the people, or of these people who were part or were members of this synagogue. That is the reason why in these two questions that mention Yeshua's family, is because Yeshua's family, was part of this synagogue in this community of Nazareth. And going to verse 4 of this chapter, we can read that Yeshua, in verse 4, it narrates how Yeshua was given such rejection by the people of Nazareth, which is why Yeshua himself says, "A prophet is not without honor except in his town and among his relatives and in his own house." And these words of Yeshua couldn't be more true for all those people who uttered the words of the Creator. And Yeshua being that great prophet that had been announced since the beginning, specifically in Deuteronomy 18:18, where it prophesies and it is mentioned how the Messiah would come to teach the good news, or the message of the good news, to the people of Israel. But many people, although they would have that opportunity to listen to the good news that Yeshua was going to teach to the people, they were going to do it without truly, or they were going to hear this message without truly understanding its message or its purpose. And it was these people, by not understanding what Yeshua was trying to, or was not understanding the message that Yeshua was trying to give to them, it was going to cause themselves to be impressed, or even it was going to take them to be in search of human teachings, of human doctrines, of religious teachings, etc. And all this just so that these people won't have, or won't feel that obligation to go to the scriptures, which was the Torah, the prophets, and the Psalms, so that they can truly understand everything that Yeshua was saying and what was the reason for Yeshua's coming. So in all of this, we can understand how although the people listened to everything that Yeshua was saying, however, they really didn't understand the message behind his teachings. And in this way, denoting not only the rejection of the Messiah, but also the disbelief that they did not give rise to Yeshua doing miracles, because these were only possible, or Yeshua could only do these miracles to the people who had faith that he was the Messiah. And this was something that was not present within these people. So therefore, we can see that Yeshua couldn't do miracles how he did in many other parts of Israel. But in this place of Nazareth, the only thing that it says is that he would heal the the people who were sick. But he did not do liberation of demons. He did not make people walk again. He did not make people see again, etc. Something that he would do in other regions. Continuing with verses 7 through 13, we can read that it tells about, or that it narrates about, the mission that Yeshua gave to his 12 disciples. But first, before we continue to see or to analyze what was the mission that Yeshua gave to his disciples, first it is important to have the correct determination about what we can read, specifically a word within these verses, which is the word sent. And this word comes from Hebrews 7,974, which means shalach, hence the designation of shaliach, plural shalachim, and it is a Hebrew term that means emissary or legal sent agent. A shaliach had the legal capacity to perform any act in place of his authority, who has delegated him as an emissary. And this was as if he were the same with full powers. In this case, we can read that Yeshua gave everything to his disciples to act as those envoys wherever they would go. Among these, he also gave his disciples important instructions which they obviously had to fulfill. And within these verses, the first instruction that we read that Yeshua gives to his disciples, which is narrated from verse 6 through verse 9, it is referring to the order that Yeshua gives them about not to take anything for the journey, any physical things, but only a staff. In other words, we can read within these verses that Yeshua tells them not to take bread, not to take a bag, not to take a copper in their belt, or even wear to take extra sandals, etc. In addition to what we can read within verses 8 to 9, we can also see how he orders them the following: and do not dress in any double tunic. And all of these instructions or instructions that the Messiah gives to his disciples of what they could not take was with the purpose that they would not fall into materialism, or even to give more importance to their luggage, to the things that they were taking or the things that they were going to carry, so that in that way they could focus first on the message, on the mission that the Messiah was giving them, which was to take the message to the people of Israel and to the nations, which this message was regarding to the good news of the Messiah, for which they already had everything. In other words, Yeshua, for this reason, it is why Yeshua was giving them everything that was necessary. Another instruction, or the second instruction that we can read within these verses that Yeshua gives to his disciples, specifically to what it narrates in verse 10 and 11, is that wherever they, or anywhere that they found themselves in, the house that they were going to enter, they should stay in that house until they leave that place for good, and any place that does not welcome them or that does not listen to the disciples, they should leave that place. Yeshua telling them that they should shake the dust from the soles of their feet. And this was how Yeshua said, with the purpose of giving testimony to these people. And this was exactly what we saw when we studied within the Torah, about how we read how the Levites they were supported by the people of Israel with what was necessary for them, since let's remember that they had a very important duty within the people of Israel. And in this case, we can read that the disciples in some way also had the welcome of the people. They didn't have the obligation to open their houses for the disciples, but it was something that the disciples could count on the people, of opening their houses for the disciples. And although how I said, not everyone was obligated to do it. And even Yeshua himself tells them that if they were not received in that certain house, or if in that house they didn't listen to them or they didn't treat them well, then that they should leave that place. In verses 12 to 13, we can read that the disciples proclaimed the message of repentance and they cast out many demons. It also narrates that they anointed with oil many sick people and healed these people. And in these verses, we can read how they did the same as their teacher Yeshua, and how all of this was with the purpose of making the message of true repentance, which is Teshuvah, the message of Teshuvah, clear and understandable for all the people that were seeing and hearing these messages and these miracles that Yeshua's disciples were performing. These instructions are still important to this day, and them is the importance, essential, and the message that should be in the life of the true disciples, which is to look beyond the earthly desires, and as well as the riches that exist within this world. Even though currently, although yes, we do not carry out the same mission that the disciples were in charge of or were given, because we do not have that same mission of going to the nations and proclaiming or giving the message of redemption, the message of the good news of the Messiah, and the message of the true repentance, which is Teshuvah. In other words, we are not in charge of this mission anymore, but however, it does teach us a very valuable lesson that we should not look beyond the earthly riches that we find within this temporary world, but rather we must keep our eyes and our gaze in the earthly things, in the celestial things, in the celestial promises. And this was something that the disciples applied to their lives, and it's something valuable that we must also apply to our lives. From verses 14 to 29, it narrates the death of John the Baptist. And the first thing that is recounted at the beginning of this section of verses is that the fame of the Messiah, Yeshua, had spread among the people. And that is why many began to say that Yeshua was the Elijah who was to come and whom the people of Israel were waiting for. Others were also saying that he was a prophet like any other prophet, and therefore it was not something, or that he was not a special person. On the other hand, we can also read within these verses that Herod believed that Yeshua was John the Baptist. However, we read that this was not the case, because Yeshua was the son of Elohim. And Yeshua himself tells his disciples this, or he clarifies that he is the son of Elohim in Matthew 16, verses 15 to 17. Now, Herod, he did, and in these verses we can read that he did think that Yeshua was John the Baptist, whom Herod himself had ordered John to be beheaded, thinking, and something that Herod thought was that John the Baptist, had been resurrected, and that is why he thought and he believed that John acted in Yeshua with powers. But all of these assumptions and thoughts that were given about who Yeshua was because, just as the same way that these verses narrate, the fame of Yeshua, his teachings, miracles, words, liberations of demons, etc., had reached all the people. And that is to say that Yeshua was a very talked about topic within the people of Israel, and probably also within the people of the nations. So for this reason, it is why there were many assumptions, many thoughts of who Yeshua was. On the other hand, within these verses, we can also read that the reason why Herod ordered the execution of John the Baptist was because apparently everything happened as a consequence of the truth that John the Baptist had exposed and denounced about the union of Herod and his wife, who at one time was the wife, or Herod's wife was the wife of his own brother, with whom he had a daughter, and this was considered adultery. Therefore, that is why John the Baptist he exposed and denounced this adultery that had been committed between Herod and his wife. And this was adultery according to the laws or the instructions of the Creator that we find within Leviticus 18 verse 16 and verses 24 to 29. Within these verses, we can also read that after this declaration that John the Baptist made about what had happened between Herod and his wife, he was this, or the consequence, or the declaration that John the Baptist, or after the declaration that John the Baptist made, he was imprisoned because Herod was afraid of killing John the Baptist, because Herod believed that John was a man of the Creator. He was a faithful servant of the Creator, and therefore, Herod executed John the Baptist, and therefore it would bring divine punishment to Herod. And in addition, we can also read that he did not have a sufficient reason to execute John the Baptist, because after all, John was saying the truth. And although at the end of these verses, verses 14 to 29, we do read that Herod kills John the Baptist because of a female manipulation and seduction, seduction. This is utilizing an exotic dance that his own daughter did for him for his for a celebration of his birthday. And here we can see that Herod was carried away by his emotions, because he had previously made a promise to not kill John the Baptist, since once again Herod recognized that John was a faithful servant of the Almighty. However, in these verses, or at the end of these verses, we can read that just because the daughter of Herod asks him to behead John the Baptist, Herod does it, and therefore he breaks the promise that he had previously made. From verses 30 to 42, it is told about the first multiplication of food that Yeshua did for the multitude that was in this place, so that they can listen to the words and teachings of the Messiah. And the place where this multiplication of food happened, within these verses, it is described, or it is narrated, that it was a lonely and desert place. In addition, we can also read that this miracle was at a very late hour, or at a very advanced hour, which is why in the environment that they found themselves in, or that this event occurred, the disciples asked Yeshua to send the people that were listening to his teachings to go away from that place, since they did not have enough food to feed all of the entire multitude. However, we can read within these verses that Yeshua does not listen to his disciples, but rather he goes furthermore. Why? Because he does a miracle, an extraordinary miracle, and the first miracle regarding to the multiplication of the food. And this was not only another miracle that Yeshua did, or that Yeshua performed, but it was also an action that through it gave a message to his disciples, which was that that Yeshua himself tells his disciples the following, that they are the ones who must in some way feed the people. And in this miracle that Yeshua performed to feed the multitude, he also carried a message and teaching for the disciples, which was that Yeshua was providing physical food, but most importantly that most importantly was that Yeshua was bringing the spiritual food, which is the word, to the people who were in search of the truth. And this was exactly what Yeshua's disciples had to do with the people of the nations, that they had to bring closer, they had to feed these people who were in search of the truth with the spiritual food that lasts forever. And in this miracle, we can also read that 3 important elements are used for this miracle, in which they also have a very important significance. First, we can read about the 5 loaves that are mentioned. And these 5 loaves represent, according to the meaning given to the numbers, it means favor and or mercy. We also, or the second element that it is mentioned within this miracle, it is regarding to the 2 fishes that Yeshua multiplied. And these fishes represent the 2 houses of Israel, the north and the south, which represents the house of Judah and the house of Ephraim. And this food that Yeshua provided was for those 2 houses of Israel. In other words, Yeshua was feeding not only the house of the north, but he was also feeding the house of the south. In other words, he was feeding the whole house of Israel. And the third element that we can see within this verse that is mentioned is about the 12 baskets, which represent the 12 tribes and Israel itself, meaning that the food would not only be for Israel, but also for those who were outside of Israel. In other words, those who had been exiled to a desert place. And they were also going to have that opportunity to receive this spiritual food. Finally, in these verses, or lastly within these verses about this miracle that Yeshua did of multiplying the food, is when it mentions about the advanced hour or the late hour. And when it says this, or when it mentions this, it is referring to the fact that everything was going to come to an end. From verses 45 through 52, we can read that Yeshua's disciples were still processing about this whole miracle that had occurred in this multiplication of food, because it was not something that was very common to see. It was actually something that they've never seen, because it was a miracle after all performed by Yeshua. So we can read within these verses 45 through 52 that Yeshua's disciples, while they were processing everything that they had experienced, Yeshua orders them to go to the other side of that place that they were at, which Yeshua sends them to the place called Bethsaida. And while Yeshua prayed on land, it is narrated, or we can read that his disciples were in the sea going to, or on their way to Bethsaida. And we can read that when Yeshua sees the difficulties that his disciples were facing, which were the very harsh winds as well as the fatigue that they were going through, Yeshua decides to approach them by walking on the water. And this he does it, and we can read that he does it as if it was something normal or something simple to do that any human being can do. So the moment that Yeshua walks on water, we can read that his disciples, when they see this, they thought it was a ghost, because once again, it's not something normal. It's not something very common to see in the human being, or that the human being can do. So therefore, we can read that the disciples, when seeing this action that the Messiah did, it caused them fear. It did cause them fear. But however, we can read that Yeshua showed himself to them. He revealed himself to them, and he gave them a message, which was the following: take courage. I am the Messiah. Do not be afraid anymore. And this message from Yeshua was not only going to serve his disciples of the Messiah at that time. In other words, it was not only a words of encouragement for his disciples, but it was also words of encouragement for the mission that they were going to be facing later on in their lives, which Yeshua had given them. Because we can read that Yeshua himself tells his disciples that their mission was not going to be easy, that they were going to suffer a lot, that they were going to go against very harsh things, but that they still had to have that encouragement to fulfill their mission, because the Messiah was going to be with them, and therefore they did not have to be afraid of what was going to come. They did not have to be afraid of going out into the nations. As well, we can see that in these verses it is mentioned about how the disciples were in the sea and how they were afraid of being in the sea. And when it says the sea, it is representing the nations, of how the disciples, despite all the time that they would go against the wind and the difficulties that they had to face, they were still going to they still had to have that encouragement of continuing filling their mission that the Messiah had given to them, because the Messiah was going to be with them. Finally, from verses 53 to 56, we can read about the healings that Yeshua performed for the people after this memorable sea crossing that Yeshua did. And we can also read within these verses that Yeshua and his disciples, once arriving to Gennesaret, a place where it says in these verses that the following healings occurred due to the increase of Yeshua's fame, where many of these people wanted to even touch the hem of Yeshua's garment so that they can be healed. And just as we can read within these last verses of this chapter 6, all of these miracles were with the purpose that all those who approached Yeshua, who believed in Yeshua and in everything that Yeshua was teaching, was saying, and with all of this, or this faith that they had in the Messiah and of what the Messiah was doing, what the Messiah was teaching, they were going, or it was a way to denote their faith, by which all these healings were possible. In other words, if the people had that faith in the Messiah, then they were going to receive that healing, or that healing was going to be possible. And not only that, but they were also going to receive that spiritual food that was brought through the Messiah, and that the Messiah was giving out to not only the people of Israel, but also to all the people, to all humankind, because all humankind has that opportunity to receive that spiritual food, to receive the salvation, only if the person decides to return to the Father, to do teshuvah, and therefore start walking in that consecration and in that obedience towards their Creator. And well, this is all what we can see and what we can analyze within this chapter 6. Thank you very much for your time, and we will see each other in the next one.